ask you, Aleisha, what your overall impressions have been from today, what the sort of key themes you've been able to pick up.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris. My first impressions of the day are, I'm really, really impressed, actually. This is kind of my first interaction with Living Streets and with the Walking Summit. And I was really, really happy to see such a range of speakers representing different communities in Wellington, and being able to share their stories and their experiences. And I think what was really key and quite obvious for me was that we all agree on the gaps in Wellington's urban design and the failures, really. And we also agree on a lot of the solutions. And I think everyone touched on the fact that considerations for marginalized and vulnerable groups actually make things better for everyone, and not only the people using the environment and using the space, but also better for the planet in terms of climate and the work that we need to do around that. And something else that came up a couple of times was the messaging around walking and the changes to urban design that are coming with cycling and walkways and that kind of thing. The messaging around that needs to really change, and there needs to be support with the many scientific articles and research that has been done over the last over decades. All of that kind of real discussion needs to be as publicized as those pictures of people crossing their arms in front of cycleways, if not more. That messaging needs to change so that people understand the short-term and long-term benefits of having a city where everyone can walk around safely and freely.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, yeah, that very strong need for, especially that countering the negative coverage that new facilities receive. So I guess what we could sum up a term that's used in the disability community, sort of the idea of universal design, making it so it's suitable for everybody, from 8 months to way over 80 is probably the ideal. All right, Charles, did you have any other thoughts that you wanted to share about what you heard earlier today?
Not specifically. I did want to do one bit of skating, if that's the right word. In Nelson, our city council has started something called I'm trying to find the title for you, Phase 2 of the Nelson City Council's Innovating Streets project. And they've chosen a few of the streets not far from the town centre, and they've put in sort of things like stopping at each of the points where the junction comes. So there's a stop point at each section, so people have to stop whichever way they're coming from and going to, and also things in the street to slow the traffic down. The use of colour on the streets, and putting in these streets natural things like boxes with plants in and seats and everything, trying to make those streets come alive. Now they've only tried it in 2 or 3 streets so far.
Seem to have lost sound, Charles.
Try again. Am I there?
That's better, thank you.
Sorry. I wish people, I thought when I was in the pulpit in the cathedral, I think people would have liked a mute facility then. But anyway, so the City Council have been doing this experiment, and I feel that the feedback has been very good. There's been some amendments to it, and that's a good positive step forward for our City Council. And the other thing is that Nelson City Centre, which is not massive, it's not a Wellington or an Auckland, but already we've gone to 30 k's speed limit around the main part of the inner city, and that's something we're living with now. We've been doing that for about 4 months, 5 months maybe, and most of the roads out of the city now have gone to 80. So with all the the benefits which follow on from that. So just feed that in from my own local experience.
Thanks, Charles. And so a number of innovating streets projects have occurred in different parts of the country, and as you heard this morning, there's been some pretty negative reactions reported in some places. Do you think there's anything special about Nelson that meant that that's been by and large well received?
It may be that people haven't made their comments, but we're just going through the process of the 10-year plan being discussed now. So people are given the opportunity to feed in their comments. And the newspaper usually is a good indicator when you get letters coming in about what people are feeling. I mean, some people I think did think it was a bit strange at first, but when the reasoning started to come out, I do think people started to think it through. This was good for the safety of the community, the safety of our children, because there were several schools around this area, and children walking and cycling to school, and using their scooters and things like that. So it's all helping the community as a whole to live successfully in that part of Nelson. So I think people are willing to give it a go.
Chris, can I just say something?
Sure.
I've got, we went to visit NZTA this week, and we spoke about innovating streets. And even though I have a list here of innovating streets feedback, we've got Pukekohe, online threat over road Pukekohe closures, referred to police. We've got Onehunga, we had a private forklift moving the barriers that they'd put into roads to calm traffic and make it safer for schools. We had a reaction in Gore's, discontent bubbles over Southland's controversial trial. Hutt City, business owners get medieval over trial of Hutt City Cycleway. Brooklyn, mad about cycleways. And Hamilton, man behind some of the city's showpiece buildings, likens the garish remodel to taking steps backwards. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cities out of the entire country. And NZTA actually said they expected more. Because it was a playtime for everyone, for consultants, for the public, and for the car owners to be told that maybe it's not a good idea to go so fast here or even go in this area. So I consider this whole innovating streets thing as quite interesting. And it was, Catherine King's been in charge of it.
Thanks, Andy. Yep. So anything to do with parking or driving or rubbish or dogs seems to exercise people quite strongly. Kalumi said, or Callum L, I'm not sure. Sorry, he or she has no microphone, but that the limits, this lower speed limits, deterred people from shortcutting through the central city. And yes, a lot of central cities do have that problem. They're seen as shortcuts. I know where I live in Palmerston North, that's long been the case, and things are being done to try to deter people from doing that with some success, I might say. But again, met opposition and vocal opposition. But anyway, it happens. All right. Perhaps we should move on to the final question. And this is, I guess it's more sort of blue skies thinking. How do we make walking a great experience? I guess not just make it possible, but make it really good so that some of that joy of walking can be experienced. Sean, would you like to start, seeing you haven't had opportunity to speak yet?
Thank you. I am come at this from quite an interesting background. I'm an urban planner by qualification, but most of my expertise is in the digital side of planning. And so when I look at walking, it's something I do a lot. It's how I get to work, but it's also an activity that's often quite invisible. It happens in an instant when you walk past something. And so, to me, the key to great walking experiences is for people to be able to understand that they occur. So by being able to better measure walking through our city, it helps us be able to fund it. It helps retailers understand the value of walking to them. It also helps the city understand the many different roles walking plays within its economy. So, for example, one of the reasons for a relatively low rate of drink driving in Wellington is because so many people walk home from the pub afterwards instead of drive. There are all sorts of societal benefits that we don't really talk about. The other piece, which is a little bit of work that I'm sure Vida will tell you about tomorrow, is doing things like our walking network, which are the digital models of the city we use to simulate walking. What's special about them this time is building in different types of experiences for accessibility, for children, for understanding that not everybody walks for the same purpose, at the same speed, at the same time. And so that helps us understand things like, take where I'm sitting now. I'm sitting halfway between Lambton Quay and the Terrace. There's a 7-story difference between the two streets. At lunchtime, those two streets are about a minute's walk apart if you take a lift between them. After 6 o'clock, for me to get from one street to the other without using my pass card, it will be probably about a 5 to 10 minute walk. And so understanding how walking changes through the day means that we can shape those experiences so that you get one experience during the day, another at night, but they're equally enriching, they're safe, and they're inclusive, but they're not necessarily the same. And then probably the other piece is walking for different purposes. One of the biggest problems in urban planning is most of our data is based on commuting. That means that many of the trips undertaken by children, by women, by husbands, are completely invisible because they're not collected. And that means that we end up with a lot of unnecessary driving in our city simply because we are blind to the causes of it. It also means we end up with inequitable outcomes. So one of the most interesting bits of work I do is I look after the digital twins of the city, which are the massive virtual reality models we use for planning. And one of the most interesting things is when you put a child into those rather than an adult. An adult will always go home and then they will virtually walk to work and they will orient their world that way. Children don't do that. A child will go to the top of Te Ahumairangi Hill, they'll stand on Soames Island, they'll balance on the tip of the Beehive flagpole, anywhere they're not really allowed to go. And what this suggests to us is a very different spatial relationship with the city, and also one that we could work to exploit to become a much more child-friendly city, a more playful city, so we can see some life in our streets. And thank you.
Thank you, Sean. No, I think that's a really valuable perspective. I know when I visit Wellington, I enjoy walking here so much because not only is it that I haven't seen things for a little while, but there are so many things of interest to see. I mean, partly it's the terrain, the topography compared to Palmerston North's flat city, but also lots of art and alleyways and murals and things like that. It just makes it such an enjoyable experience. So thank you. Aotearoa, could we perhaps pass back to you what you think would make a walking in Wellington or more generally a really great experience?
It's quite hard to go after Sean. I feel like Sean covered everything and in such an eloquent way. But I guess I just want to echo what Sean said, particularly around different types of users having different experiences, but not losing, but it's still enriching and still a good experience. I introduced myself and said that I work with the National Council of Women and the Wellington Alliance Against Sexual Violence, but those are both voluntary roles. In my real job, I work in software, and we do a lot of work around accessibility. And we always talk about the idea that an accessible software or web app is something that everyone can use. And the way that they use it will look different, but they don't lose any information and they don't lose anything because of whatever is causing them to use the site in a different way. And it's exactly the same with walking. So yeah, just wanting to echo what Sean said, and just because someone is walking or using a wheelchair or being driven somewhere privately because of the lack of access to proper transport, they should be able to get from A to B safely, easily, affordably, and it shouldn't be a chore. It shouldn't be difficult, and it's something that I think we can achieve through education, through more people being able to attend events like this and hearing all of these really incredible perspectives, and through consultation when we design our cities, and making sure that we're talking to all the different types of people that use our spaces, also consulting with local iwi, and making sure that we're building not just for today's generation, but for tomorrow's and the one after. Yeah.
Thank you, Aleisha. Thanks for those thoughts. Yes, you just mentioned the spaces that we move into or pass through. That's sort of the idea of placemaking and making interesting places where people might want to spend some time as well as just pass through. Really has, I would say, taken off, and we heard during the week from at the Ministry of Transport when we met with them. They've got a team now really looking at, I think they're calling it reshaping streets, I think is the tentative title of that work stream, but they said that the minister is right behind that. So, there seems like there's good recognition of that need to create comfortable, safe, enjoyable, interesting, enriching places in our cities. So, all right, Charles, back to you. If you would like to maybe have the not necessarily the last word, but another word on this, about how to make walking really enjoyable, making it so that people want to do it and perhaps choose it as their first choice.
Thank you. Well, if Aleisha had problems, I've got even more problems after what Aleisha had to say. Thank you for that. I remember when I first had my stroke, and then I was assessed and was able to drive again, and that gave me freedom as somebody with the disability I had at the time. And I was given a card, a disabled card, user's card, to put in my car. So when I was going out of the car, I could go to a designated car park and all the rest of it. I remember going up with our young daughter, Stephanie, one day, and she said, "Dad, why do you need to park there?" And I said, "Well, it's got a disabled sign on the ground." "But Dad, if you park further away, you can walk more." And from the mouths of babes came that great truth, as it were. And I've never forgotten what Stephanie said. And it's all about making our trip into wherever we're going a pleasurable thing, being positive about it. And I agree with what Aleisha said about education. And I think in schools and in other areas, we need to be educating the whole of our community, the importance of it. And almost, well, we have a road code. Do we have a code for use of the pavement? Because now the pavements are getting so busy, not only with pedestrians, but also with scooter users and people with disabled vehicles and all the rest of it. There almost seems to be the need for a code for the use of the pavement to make it safe for everybody, to say that we're thinking about everybody, not just our own little niche corner of the market, as it were. What else would I do to make it a pleasurable thing? Yes, I think the withdrawal of petrol-driven vehicles, or the diminishment of petrol-driven vehicles in our roads, in our streets, and the lessening of the atmospheric damage that does, will make it more pleasurable. So I think my wife's just gone to her first hybrid car, and she's so superior to me. She makes me feel terrible for driving for an SUV. So next time I change, I'll have to follow suit. So we do need to work on the environment by the sorts of vehicles we're allowing in our roads, and learn from science what we can do and how well we can do it. And I think also we need to sort of drive home to our families, our whānau, our communities, the importance of the social contract we have with each other, to respect each other and to care for each other. When we're walking down the street, are we just thinking about ourselves, or are we looking around to help other people? Last week in Richmond, I went to take a service at the church there, and there was a chap who was been riding his bike, and I thought he was in distress, but he wasn't. But I went over to him and said, "Are you okay?" And, "Oh yes, that was fine." That led to a nice conversation. So we need to be aware of other people and to have that responsibility for each other, as road users should too. We should have responsibility for each other and not use our cell phones as we're driving and all the rest of it. But having that sort of social conscience and social investment in the atmosphere, in the environment, I think is vital for a pleasurable future in walking. And God willing, I'll be walking to the day I die, so I'm trying to lengthen that as much as I can. I'm 70 next month, so I'm going to keep on going. So I'm hopeful that there's going to be a good future walking for me.
Excellent. I think it would increase the chances, Charles, the more you walk.
Okay, thank you.
Are you, sorry, just a slight diversion. Do you know, are you involved at all with the Age Concern Walking Companion program?
Not at the moment, no. I'll look into it now, though.
Okay, I heard about it recently, and it sounds a particularly good thing, because so many older people, particularly, really rely on being able to walk for many aspects of their well-being, both mental and physical.
I think it happens out of our branch in Nelson Tasman.
And can I come in there? Wellington Age Concern have this service, and it is quite popular. And there are plenty of examples of how people have not been able to get out at all. They have a walking companion, even if they are working with sticks or with walkers. And this just gives them so much more freedom and to be able to see something different and walk out in the fresh air.
Yeah.
I wonder if I could add something else here. There was a comment earlier in the conference about how to use the health services as a way of encouraging walking. Well, one way of doing that is the green prescription. Have people heard about green prescription?
Yeah, yes.
Where a GP could actually prescribe to a patient that they should walk for 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, however much seemed useful for them. And I think that might be something to look at and to possibly encourage.
So you're saying that it already exists in some places, but not everywhere, or?
Green prescriptions is...
Oh, yeah, green prescriptions does, but I'm familiar with it in terms of when I go swimming, I see people that I know are there under green prescriptions for weight loss, whatever it is, doing aerobics and things like that. But are you suggesting that walking is not one of the options currently used under green prescriptions, or?
Oh, yes, I think it is. I'm just saying that people perhaps need to be more aware of it. I'm not...
Yes.
I don't know how many GPs actually participate in that scheme. Perhaps they could be encouraged.
Yes, yes. Okay, thanks. All right. Any other comments from anyone, really?
I was interested to hear Charles's comments. I'm the owner of a neurological condition as well. I've had MS for more than a dozen years now, and I'm interested in his comments on the footpaths. I am somewhat of a champion of improving the footpaths around Lower Hutt, and I'm always amazed that the council seems to run this policy of not knowing anything about anything until someone tells them. so I sort of complain about bits and pieces, and I volunteer to do it for other people as well. And people are very slow to come forward with their views unless you live in one of the rich areas, and then they'll bombard you with information that they've gathered and haven't done anything with. But as an MS sufferer, the risk of falls is extreme, especially when you're coming down with it. And I had a meeting at the hospital the other day. I'm on their serious adverse events committee, which looks at issues that happen in the hospital to patients, and falls are one of the common things, although it's not, it might be one every now and again, but it's a serious issue when someone falls in the hospital and breaks something. And they got to the end of this expose about the person's things, and they said to me, Paul, have you got any comments to make about it? And I just said to them, I said I could write a book on falls because I've had so many of them. And everybody just cracked up. And they say I'm their falls champion now. So, but it just goes to show that educating the people is very important to prevent falls, and getting the council to improve the footpaths is amazing. And lately, what I've been doing, they've done a sort of walkway, but it's a path which is a shared access path, which runs for about 6 or 7 kilometres down the middle of the hut. And I've worked out that if I use this new path, which is very excellent when you're on it, that I can get to the big shopping centre down the middle of the hut by crossing 6 roads, including Knights Road, which is one of these projects that everybody's complaining about. But if I take my former route down the middle of High Street and off King's Crescent, which is a road, I have to cross 20 streets. So I save crossing about 14 streets on my trip to the hut. And this has been so good. And there's another similar walkway down the river as well, which I have been using quite a bit. And I stopped using my car so much that whenever I did try and use it, which involves getting my wheelchair out and getting over to the car and loading it and unloading it and then doing it in reverse to come home, whenever I did use it, it was so uncommon that the bloody thing wouldn't start. And I decided that I'd just get rid of it. So I've got rid of my car now. So I'm 100% electric now. And yes, I think I'm doing about 75% of my trips on shared pathways now versus streets, really. So I'm really keen on encouraging people to give up their cars now, really. So one question I'd ask for Charles if I was having a wee chat with him, which could happen, is instead of getting an EV for himself, why doesn't he just get rid of the bloody car altogether and get a mobility scooter if he can't walk that far anymore?
Oh, I just borrow my wife's, that's all right.
It'll certainly be cheaper.
Thank you very much, Paul. You raised the issue that many people have mentioned about the state of footpaths being less than what they would hope. When I was on the council in Palmerston North, I discovered that they have all sorts of what they call performance criteria or performance standards. So things like they need to respond to a telephone call complaining about an overflowing sewer within X minutes, or a dog on the loose within a period of time, and they apparently count up how many times they meet those standards and how many times they don't. And then they get a pass or a fail. What I discovered was that their performance standard for footpaths only required something like, and this is going back a little while, so I'm just doing it by memory, something like a 65% or 70% satisfaction rate, whereas the performance standard for the roadway was 90 or 95%. Now, I did manage to bring those together and raise the footpath one, but I would encourage people to ask their own councils about what their performance standards are around their footpaths, and then compare those with the road, and at least make the argument that they should certainly be no less than for the road, and actually they should probably be higher than for the road. So just a little suggestion there. Does anybody else have any other comments or questions they would like to make of any of the speakers or of the panelists today?
I've got a little one.
Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you for interesting presentations, everybody. We often kind of focus on the things you can touch on the road. It's easy to talk about, getting good footpaths, hard to get them, but there's a whole lot more to having a good walking experience than that. I know Sean's done a lot of thinking in in the kind of digital sphere and how we manage things at a different level. And when we went on the workshop today, Aleisha, the Wellington Girls students said we're talking quite a lot about what it's like walking in the dark, and not just at night. They out there are doing their sports practice things in the morning, and this time of year, obviously, we really think about that quite a lot. So I was just wondering, what we need good infrastructure, but what other things do either of you two think are really key for making this big change, getting our 25% walk mode increase, for instance?
Thanks, Helen. Was that directed at anybody in particular?
Oh, I was thinking Aleisha or Sean might want to comment on that. Sorry.
Aleisha, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So, besides infrastructure and education, which I've already talked a lot about, I think that the next step is it's kind of up to communities and organisations such as Living Streets and these school groups to create opportunities for people to get out there and to motivate people to use the streets more. I know that there are they have, people, workplaces will have contests of, how many people can we get to bike to work today, and motivating people by having a breakfast on by the time they get to the office or something like that, just something to incentivize using the streets. And and that will also, show councils and the people that have the power to change the infrastructure, that the streets are being used for more than just moving through or getting from A to B, but they're also the destination themselves. Yeah, it's up to the communities and the people.
Often what makes a good walking environment are very small details. They're things like making sure that the street lights are working and actually cast the lights onto the footpath in a way where you can see the footpath and the surroundings. It's about the interaction with things like foliage. It can be lovely to have all that green during the day, but at night it can become shadowy or obscured. And then the other piece to it I tend to think of is the sort of social license of walking. Is it something that people feel safe doing? Is it just something that people do as part of their daily life? So, for example, I try to take my children to school walking. Now, I walk them because the eldest one's only 6 years old. But there's a really interesting question of, by the time I was 7 years old, as a kid in South Auckland, I was walking to school. And yet, I probably wouldn't get my children to do that now. Even though, ostensibly, I can tell you that Karori feels a lot safer than Aotearoa did back then. And so that has a really interesting question of that perception of safety. How do we get parents to give children independence? And that independence is a really important motivator of walking. It's also the key to getting people onto public transport, because once you can walk alone, then you can ride alone. That has some really important flow-on effects as well. I can tell you, my day would be a lot easier if I didn't have to build in half an hour at either end of it to walk somebody to school and back. And it's, again, one of those impacts on people's lives that we don't always think about. We don't talk about how the independence of walking can de-stress parents. We don't talk about how the independence of walking can provide children with their first taste of responsibility. And so hard infrastructure fixes are absolutely vital, but so is that soft community stuff that Aleisha was talking about making sure people actually do use it.
Actually, Sean, what you've just said has reminded me about another common theme that came up today was the combination of walking and the use of public transport. And the bus system and particularly the bus system, once work has been done to fix our public transport, I think people will be motivated to walk more rather than rely on private transport.
Let's hope so, although certainly things like COVID pose particular challenges for public transport. I think around the country its use has dropped in recent times, certainly dropped off the trajectory that it was on. Thank you, Sean, just for mentioning about walking children to school. And although that takes perhaps an extra half hour at the front and end of the day, it provides both the person doing it and with them and the children themselves quite a bit of exercise, to sort of stretch towards the target exercise that we seem to need each day or are recommended to have each day, and probably saves the time that will be spent going to the gym if people were committed to achieving that level of exercise anyway. So, as well as, I guess, the time just to be with the kids and talk and see what they observe along the way, and just to be with them. So I think it's incredibly important for people to do.
Chris, may I add something? I've just seen a question that's come up about walking school bus. So I'm Delia, and I work with Auckland Transport, and I'm in a very privileged situation because although it's a heavy workload, I work with 62 schools, and I've got about 115 active walking school buses. One of the questions that's come from Carol is how are walking school buses taught? Why is it that they're still so popular? Now, from experience, and I've been working with this program for the past 5 years, one of the best things about it is that it builds a tremendous and a great sense of community. So we have parents coming into a school who's totally new to the environment, to the neighborhood, and it's one of the best ways to get to know people, to get to know who's living on your street. They soon realize that if you're on a walking school bus, there's a little bit of, you can assert some power. And we, in fact, what happens generally, before I give them the green light, if there's a new route, I'm thinking just locally. I live in Mount Eden, and over the past month, I've recruited 4 new bus routes at the local school down the road, Mongavau. And before giving them the heads up to proceed, there were lots of safety hazards that needed to be rectified. So there were, like Charles has said, when we look at the state of our footpaths, there are lots of native trees that are causing a little bit of havoc on the footpath, so that needed to be fixed. The roots that have come up, and they've just lifted the whole footpath, and that's a serious trip hazard. So one of my tricks that I have, it's not a trick really, but it's about me saying, look, we've got many little pedestrians that use this, let alone adults that use the footpaths. We need to have this fixed. And that gets remedied within 2 hours. It's a record time. So it's, like I said, it's a very privileged situation. Footpath condition is paramount. What I would like to see is, like earlier speakers have mentioned, that there's ongoing maintenance of walkways. Very often they're overlooked, and again, it's a slippery or moss covered walkway or overhanging foliage that never gets attended to. So it would be great if council could be a little bit more vigilant in that respect. And I think the greatest challenge for us is that parents are busy. They're working mums, working dads. But what I'm working on is a corporate sponsorship plan so that would mean I'm going to be working on approaching local corporate organizations in Auckland to say, look, this is part of your social responsibility. Yes, there's climate change, and that's in the picture. But what are you doing? This is your part, your opportunity to play your part. Could you not offer your employees an hour off work if they are prepared to volunteer their time on a walking school bus? So I'm working on that. My department's already put that in place, and it's working wonderfully. And I mean, what when we talk about the success of the walking school bus, it's all of the benefits all of our keynote speakers for today have mentioned: the health benefits, the benefits to less congestion around the school gate, the fun the kids have. I volunteer my time once a week, and I've learned about what ingredient makes the best lasagna. That Nana's breath smells too much when she has too much wine. It's all these lovely stories that I hear on the walking school bus, and I think it's a lovely opportunity for parents to connect with their kids as well. A nice bonding time for them. So my greatest challenge on a personal level is that when parents say, look, Delia, there's no crossing infrastructure, and I would put in a request to Auckland Transport, and it's all about priority. This is, it's about doing a pedestrian account, and I hear all of that. I hear the restrictions from that end with funding, but I think, like Aleisha and many others have said, it's about prioritization. Getting key messages from the Ministry of Transport, maybe Waka Kotahi. We have been given, the walking school bus in particular, has been given extra funding this year. But if that could be if they could drive home some really important messages that we all have a part to play. We're in this together. Road safety is everyone's responsibility. And if we have less cars on the road, then we're on a winning streak. We will be on a winning streak. So yeah, that's my comment for the day.
Thank you, Delia. That's very good to hear. Such progress being made with getting kids to walk to school in Auckland. And Paula, I'm sure, from Living Streets will be very keen to have heard all that. All right, is there, just really, I guess, needing to wrap up shortly, is there anybody else that has something really important or desperate or to say it? Now is your chance. Please speak up.
Can I just put another word in for a consultation that closes tomorrow? Sorry about the short deadline, but the Ministry of Transport has got a consultation on transport emissions. And if you've got 5 minutes, just click on I put the link in the chat. Just click on them and click on it and put an email saying we need more walking. You don't need to do any more than that. You don't need to answer all the complicated questions. Just put in add to the emphasis they're already starting to put on walking to make it snowball.
Great, thanks, Mike. Yep, sometimes it can just a simple direct message is most valuable. So thanks. Anybody else? Judith, do you want to say anything? Your face has just come up.
Oh, I wish it would go away. No, I'm still listening. Okay,
very good. All right, don't see anybody else wanting to speak. So thank you very much to Alicia and to Aleisha and Charles and Sean for being speakers and on the panel this afternoon, and for everybody else who's contributed their thoughts to the discussion.